Penguin Random House Audio presents Quiet Street on American Privilege. This is the author, Nick McDonell. Or perhaps a person can write about things only when she is no longer the person who experienced them, and that transition is not yet complete. The person who writes about her experience is not the same person who had the experience. The ability to write about it is proof of change, of great distance. Not everyone is willing to admit this, but it's true. In this sense, a conversion narrative is built into every autobiography. The writer purports to be the one who remembers, who saw, who did, who felt. But the writer is no longer that person. In writing things down, she is reborn, and yet still defined by the action she took, even if she now distances herself. Rachel Kushner, The Hard Crowd, Essays, 2000 to 2020. Preface. In the first spring of the pandemic, I worked a few shifts at a hospital in Brooklyn. The governor had asked on television that healthcare workers volunteer, and tens of thousands did. I was surely among the least qualified. An EMT on paper, I had till then worked a total of 12 hours, a single overnight ambulance rotation amid the bars and projects of Manhattan's Lower East Side. Over the course of that night, we transported 10 or so patients to various hospitals. I bandaged the forearm and hand of a stabbing victim, lifted and wheeled a diabetic drunk, commiserated with a repeat psychiatric patient who said the government was spying on him, which, in one form or another, it probably was. This was the limit of my clinical experience. And so, when an official from the New York Medical Reserve Corps called with my assignment, based on the form I'd submitted online, my first thought was, if they're calling me, the situation must be a little bit dire. At the hospital, the human resources official with whom I checked in thanked me, and then, somewhat sheepishly, asked if I was willing to work in the morgue. That's where they could really use the help, she explained. I had been looking forward to treating the living, but on quick reflection supposed the dead were more commensurate with my level of experience, and agreed to go wherever she thought best. The work itself left little time for reflection. It consisted of bagging, moving, tagging, and inventorying corpses. The main problem, for me, was goggles. Mine fogged up. We were advised, however, not to touch our goggles once we had them on, lest we bring the virus from our hands to our faces. And so, as the first shift progressed, rather than adjust my goggles, I tilted my chin ever higher into the air, peering down my nose through a shrinking, unfogged window. I envied one of my colleagues his superior's ski goggles. Through the fog, it was almost impossible to see what I was doing. The morgue itself was well lit, but the hallways were dim, and the refrigerated trailer into which we loaded the bodies was dark. We wore headlamps, but tripped consistently over the plywood ramp we'd fashioned to get the gurneys inside the trailer. In order to identify names sharpied onto tags and bags, I had to bring my face right up close, which, of course, was the last thing I wanted to do. My mask obscured mostly the distinctive smell of death, but not entirely. Compromised of sight and smell, I lumbered about in my hazmat suit, unable to hear my colleagues' directions, which, muffled by masks, had to be repeated at increasing volume. There were so many bodies that we had to lay some on the floor, presenting ourselves with an additional tripping hazard. My partner on the first shift was Michael, whose name, like some others in this audiobook, I've changed for the sake of privacy. When our supervisor introduced us in the hallway outside her tiny basement office, he was shadowboxing. This did not inspire a great deal of confidence, but Michael was both competent and, from what I could tell, well-liked. On the 2 occasions we transported patients rather than corpses, he charmed them in spite of their severe illness and discomfort. He was black, Jamaican, joked and teased constantly. He was a master fish fryer, he said, and had made a smart real estate investment in Atlanta, which he showed me via live security cam feed on his phone. He wanted to know about my romantic life, and if I had shot up the club, which, he clarified, meant gotten my girlfriend pregnant. In the break room, he announced the equality of all people and mocked the president, who appeared sometimes on the wall-mounted TV between sitcom reruns. Michael also pointed out the flyer, pinned to the bulletin board, that memorialized his friend and colleague, who had that month died of the coronavirus. Next to this flyer was another, apparently authored by a union, arguing that health workers like Michael should be receiving hazard pay during the pandemic. They weren't. Michael spoke in a baritone, and sometimes liked to sing while we waited or worked, in the style of 70s protest songs. Corona, Corona, be killing the people. He told me he had been at the hospital 17 years, and in that time raised a son who was now doing similar work at another hospital. He also made sure I had one of the good masks. These were in short supply, and kept in a box under the desk of a regal, salt-and-pepper-haired lady named Stella who administered the ER. She teased me when I arrived, along the lines of a lascivious, he can work for me, even suggesting that when I next came, I should bring champagne and rope, as though one of us might tie the other up, for pleasure. I regretted immediately, saying that I would bring the rope. Stella called most people who passed her desk in the center of the ER baby. Michael referred to colleagues the same way, and told me more than once the hospital was a big family. My other colleagues in the morgue, all seconded there to deal with the flood of the dead, were less sentimental. I sensed, in fact, that even if they liked Michael, they found him a little annoying, a bit like an overly opinionated uncle at a holiday dinner. I noted, too, that Michael preferred, understandably, not to move bodies into the trailer, and sometimes, when possible, left this onerous task to younger men. First among them was the owner of the ski goggles, Jawan. He was our leader, coordinating our efforts, counting off the lifts. 1, 2, 3, Jawan would say, and we'd hoist a body. He was on the verge of finishing his nursing degree, and, perhaps of necessity, better organized than the rest of us. Everyone liked him, but I cannot have been the only one who envied his goggles. By the second half of each shift, I gave up trying to see through my own, and moved them up onto my forehead. The rest of my colleagues fared little better, eye protection-wise. Their flimsy plastic face shields, provided by the hospital, tended to skew and fall off. Bare-eyed, we felt an especial urgency to finish. For the longer we spent among the dead, the more likely, it seemed to us, we would contract the virus that had killed all these people. I confess that, in our hurry, we may have once misplaced a body, or rather, mislabeled one. But by the time we realized the paperwork didn't make sense, that the count might be off, we had been in the trailer a long time. One of the bags had ripped. Evil-looking fluids dripped and pooled on the floor. A look passed between us. Probably it was fine. Time to get out of the trailer. I will leave out of this introductory sketch the time one of the trailer shelves broke, dropping one body onto another, as well as the maddening process of removing a hazmat suit, the pedestrians who gawped at our work through the chain-link fence, the Eastern European accented undertaker who palmed me a 20 for the speed with which we produced the corpses he had come to collect in his cardboard coffins, Michael's disquisition on Bob Marley's genius, Jawan's advice on the mental preparation required to deal with the dead, the husband and wife we tried to keep together in the sea of body bags, and all the awful rest of it. When I volunteered, I thought I might collect such incidents and turn them into a book about life in that hospital, a kind of practitioner's memoir. But by my fourth shift, it seemed to me that, to do so properly, I would have to work there for years, to become, however much I could, a member of the community, which was majority black and Latinx, and not wealthy, and I was not prepared to do so. Moreover, I wondered whether, even if I did stay for years, I could write about this community well or usefully, being as I was of a different race and economic class, an outsider. I was, in a sense, a professional outsider. For over a decade, I had reported and written about Iraqis and Afghans caught in the American wars. But recently I'd stopped, no longer thinking myself an appropriate person to tell their stories. I had for a long time been grappling with the idea that as a white man of financial privilege, more on this term to come, it would be better, more on that to come too, for me to do some kind of intrinsically useful work, like EMTing, and leave cultural work, like writing, to people who suffered injustice, or at least combine the two. For, rather than experience injustice, I had in many ways been its beneficiary. As a volunteer in the hospital, I didn't dwell on this fact. As a writer, however, matters were more complicated. Even if I was volunteering in the morgue, I was also there, partly, to write. Was I then a tourist, or worse, a kind of profiteer? As the pandemic ebbed in New
Sample complete. Ready to continue?